Artoria versus Arthur. Now, this is a fun debate because it is so incredibly toxic every time it is brought up. And we're not here for that toxicity, we're here for the vibe. So let's get into it. Well, off the bat, I think we should all just take notice of the fact that these two are two parallel versions of each other, so they are exceedingly similar. However, they are often compared to each other to see who's stronger. And if you ever on the Biztier website known as Twitter.com, this is a weekly occurrence. So I'm just going to give my 2 cents on the matter and then move on from this topic, hopefully forever. So let's just start off with something that's pretty easy to compare, the servant's stats. In FGO, Arthur has A strength, A plus endurance, B agility, B mana, B luck, and an EX noble phantasm. And Artoria has a B strength, B endurance, B agility, A mana, A plus luck, and A plus plus noble phantasm. So overall, they are pretty relative in terms of these parameters. Obviously, physically, Arthur has more strength and endurance, but Saber has more mana and luck, and Arthur has a superior noble phantasm stat. So yeah, despite their impressive stats, they're not exactly the peak of the verse. They have both struggled with individual powerhouse servants in their respective appearances. In Artoria's case, she fights servants like Hercules and Gilgamesh that give her a run for her money, and in Arthur's case, he's faced off against powerhouses like Ozymandias, and in that case he had to team up with Arash in order to defeat Ozymandias. So even though they're both insanely powerful, it's not like they're just bodying everyone they meet. In fact, in most cases, the circumstances of their victory is pretty situational. However, despite this, they both have some insane feats. Obviously, Artoria has beaten Hercules, an insanely powerful servant, as well as Gilgamesh, who many people tout as the god of the verse. So the fact that she even managed to battle Gilgamesh and survive is impressive, despite him not being the end-all be-all of strength in the Fate universe. But setting that aside, in the story like Extella, Artoria is portrayed as the equal of Gilgamesh and above servants that are powerhouse in their own right, like Kona and Arjuna, and even Altera. So it's quite clear she's a pretty broken servant, especially when she gets to her peak performance feats. Likewise, Arthur is insane. In the original Fate prototype, he was the strongest servant that appeared, also fighting prototype servants like Ku, Gil, and Hercules. However, it's pretty easy to argue that many of these prototype servants are either relative or just downgrades to their Fate Stay Night counterparts. I think this is especially prevalent in Proto Gil versus actual Gil, and I don't think I need to explain why. Also, I think this needs to be said before we go on, but the seals on Excalibur, they might not go both ways. So if you look in something like the Type Moon Wiki, you're going to see that both versions of Excalibur supposedly have the restraints of the Round Table. However, this article isn't very well sourced on where these statements come from, and it's not entirely clear that Artoria's Excalibur receives the same sealing. There was some statements in, say, her interlude that imply that she could have seals, but it seems like only Arthur needs to lift these seals to activate his noble phantasm, whereas Artoria can seemingly, if she does have seals, use it whenever without having to lift any of them. So yeah, it's rather debated, but if you want to make the argument that Artoria doesn't have to release any seals, whereas Arthur does, you could argue that Artoria, if it came down to it, could fire Excalibur faster and therefore secure a W. And based on what we've seen, this seems to be the case. However, it clearly is shown, or at least implied, that Excalibur becomes more powerful when it is fulfilling its niche of saving the world. So, unlike Arthur, who the more seals you release, the more powerful his attack is, Artoria is simply auto-scales. So when fired normally, it's weaker than Arthur's Excalibur, because Arthur actually has to go through a few steps before he can fire it at its standard performance. But yes, if you want to compare these two at their peaks of what we've seen, I'm just going to come on and say it, that Arthur kind of slaps. He just has better showings on screen. I'm not saying that like, oh, Artoria beating Gilgamesh isn't an impressive, powerful showing. It's just that beating Gilgamesh doesn't compare to killing Beast 6. But yeah, the best feat we've seen from Artoria is her defeating Gilby. In order to do this, she had to fire Excalibur multiple times and get Avalon, which could nullify Aeon. Arthur, on the other hand, with help, was able to overpower and kill Ozymandias and also prevent the incarnation of a beast. And then he would go on in Fate Grand Order Arcade to, with help from 2 Grand Servants and Protomolan, defeat Beast 6 with the full power, or at least the most power we've ever seen from Excalibur. So yeah, for a feat-based argument, you're gonna have to give the victory to Arthur. That is, unless you want to give Artoria Avalon and just say Avalon negs, but that's kind of outside equipment that she doesn't have naturally. And although Arthur has never been seen with Avalon, I'm sure there's a Proto-Avalon out there. So if you're going to give one character outside equipment, you got to give the other character outside equipment. However, that's not the end-all be-all. Because as we know, Arthuria's Excalibur can reach the same heights, or at least similar heights, as Arthur's. This is most clearly seen in the fact that she was summoned to the Moon Cell in order to defeat Sephar. Sephar, of course, being one of the most powerful beings we've ever seen, easily clearing beasts. And despite this, Artoria was summoned in order to fill the role of killing Sephar, which of course would mean she would have to unleash power similar to the original user of Excalibur, who was capable of one-shotting the Sephar that had bodied the Olympian Pantheon. So yeah, clearly at their peaks, the best thing is it's even, because, well, there's no other way of arguing it. If you want to say Arthur can unleash all his seals to fight Artoria, you have to give Artoria the same benefit of the doubt that she can unleash the full power of Excalibur that can kill Sephar. And this is pretty memey, but we don't know if there's a proto-Sephar, as it's never been confirmed. So potentially, the killing Sephar statement only applies to the original Artoria. However, that is exceedingly memey, because we know from Lost Spell 6 that Excalibur was forged because it had to kill Sephar. So there's never been any confirmation, but I think it's safe to assume. So yeah, that's it. I think I've made it kind of clear from my perspective that I see them as fairly equal relative fighters. I kind of place them in a similar way as Enkidu and Gilgamesh, as in they're both exceedingly powerful that have their own, little niche, but they would pretty much be relative against each other. Now yeah, it's pretty easy to argue for Arthur. He has some insanely good feats that we have seen, and Artoria has kind of been left on the wayside since, well, Stay Night, she hasn't had any insane showing. I think you should love both of these characters, specifically Artoria because she's glorious, but that's it. I think it's fairly easy to argue either of these characters could win, but I'm just going to say cute anime waifu wins, even if it's not true.